Ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you to grab your coffees and your teas and find yourself a seat. I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's edition of Ideas, powered by Passion. It's brought to you tonight by, as usual, New Dawn Enterprises. And joining in tonight is the Shannon School of Business from Cape Breton University as a co-sponsor of tonight's event. So I'll just let you know we are being videotaped, and this will be up online at the Ideas site shortly after, in the next week or so, I imagine. And we're also being live streamed, so this is, I think, something relatively new to us, so hello to all those out there in internet land. My name is Doug Leonet, and I'm here to host tonight. I think I got chosen because I span both organizations, right? So my day job is I teach in the Shannon School of Business in the MBA program, focused on community economic development. And I've spent a lot of my nights over the last 10 years thinking about what goes on at New Dawn. I'm a former board member of New Dawn. So just to give you a little bit of context here, here's what Ideas is about. Here's what we do. And the whole concept of this series of talking events and events coming together, this comes from the experience of living in Cape Breton, and really New Dawn's experience of living in Cape Breton. Whereas we often get to hear, it's usually through numbers, the bad stories, the statistics, that if you spend too much time looking at them, it gets a little depressing. But on the other hand, New Dawn gets to spend a lot of time sitting down and talking to people who have these fantastic stories to tell. They're doing some wonderful things in this community that is really pushing this community and the people in this community forward in some really interesting ways. So we figured, well, let's bring together those interesting stories and see what comes out of that. And I think that the idea of the stories, the storytelling piece is important. I think that's really, in some way, that's the heart of New Dawn, is storytelling. One of my last meetings at New Dawn, I was trying to argue that the whole management style at New Dawn is about storytelling. That's our innovation to the world of management, and there's a book in there somewhere of how New Dawn just uses stories to make management decisions, which is, I think, quite a nice way to do it. And stories are really important for us because, stories, they tell us who we are. They affirm and create our destinies in a lot of ways. So the ability to tell a new story, in a lot of ways, is the ability to change the future. And so that's part of what we're here to do, is start telling some new stories and hopefully set some new paths here. So the world lost another great person yesterday, Pete Seeger, a great storyteller. And I think in all the streams of the news coming through today of the death of Pete Seeger, there's one quote that just really popped out for me. And that quote seemed to be written for this event, for this series. So in the words of Pete Seeger, the key to the future of the world is finding the optimistic stories and letting them be known. That is what we do. So, for those who've been to Ideas before, we have a set program. We have a set style of doing things, right? We're deviating from that set program tonight because we have a special guest. So usually the whole idea is that we're telling stories to ourselves. We're bringing the stories from our community so we reflect on our own stories. But if there's any weavers in the room, you know that it's really nice to bring an exotic thread in every once in a while. So we're bringing a story in from the outside tonight. And we're wrapping this event around the story of slow money that Woody Tasch is going to bring to us. So we're changing up the setup a little bit. But as you also know, music is always really important to what we do. And so we're going to continue with the music here. Now, the three gentlemen you heard playing as you're coming in and grabbing your tea and coffee, they're a band with no name. Now, Woody, you have to understand that music is really important in Cape Breton. There's a lot of music. And it's really important to how everything happens in Cape Breton. There's always music around. And the way I've witnessed this over the last while, the way bands get formed in Cape Breton is sort of, it's at a house party, and as the best I can see it, at some point in the evening, someone says stop, and it's like Clue. You just yell out a room, and whoever's in that room at that time is in the band, right? That's it. So these guys are a small band. They must have been stuck in a small room, the closet or something like that, but this is the band we have tonight. They don't need a name, but they're played quite tightly together anyway. Although they do have an alter ego when the fourth member comes by sometimes. They're 3/4 of the band Crowdus Bridge, who, yes. At least one of our panelists tonight told me that Crowdus Bridge is their current favorite Cape Breton band. So, and they do have CDs to sell at somewhere, I'm sure. Anyway, we're going to hand it back over to the musicians to enjoy a couple of their stories through music, and then we'll come back to the main event. So please, gentlemen.
All right, we're going to start you off with a tune that I wrote about 5 years ago now, I guess, that we've been playing with Crowdus Bridge for a long time. It's called Wasting Days. And I don't really know what I wrote it about. Maybe just that, wasting some time in Cape Breton. I had recently gotten back from a trip from Scotland and felt as though I was doing that, but I ended up staying here for the last 7 years. It's been great. So I've ceased wasting days, but that's what this song is.
Most of my time drinking my wine, and some folks tell me that I'm wasting days, but I'm aware of mine. The sun is still shines on this weary earth of mine. waves from the trees. Still the autumn's hard to please, though the sun was on its knees. Then the warm spring air will make the winter's hard to care. For he knows that he'd despair if he could feel her there.
We're going to play one more song. This is called The Last Thing on My Mind. Talk closer. It's called The Last Thing on My Mind, and it's by a folk singer from the 50s. Last name is Paxton. I can't remember his first name. Tom Paxton, sorry. But I've been influenced a lot by a guitar player named Tony Rice, and he did a great version of this. It's called Last Thing on My Mind.
There's a lesson too late for the learned, made of sand, made of sand. In the wake of an eye, my soul's turning in your hand, in your hand. Are you going away with no words of farewell? Will there be not a trace left behind? Well, I could have loved you better, I didn't mean to be unkind. No, that was the last thing on my mind. Got reasons plenty for going. This I know, this I know. For the weeds have been steadily growing. Please don't go, please don't go. Are you going away with no words of farewell? Will there be not a trace left behind? Well, I could have loved you better, I didn't mean to be unkind. No, that was the last thing on my mind. As we walk on, my thoughts are tumbling round and round, round and round. Underneath your feet, the subway's rumbling underground. Are you going away with no words of farewell? Will there be not a trace left behind? Well, I could have loved you better, didn't mean to be unkind. No, that was the last thing on my mind. As I lie in bed in the morning, without you, without you. Every song in my breast dies borning, without you, without you. Are you going away with no words of farewell? Will there be not a trace left behind? Well, I could have loved you better, I didn't mean
very much. This is Jason Rutterham on the bass, Kyle Leger on the banjo, and Ben Foley. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was splendid. It's always nice to be reminded how lucky we are to have so many great musicians in this little corner of the world here. So, we're wrapping the night around this keynote address from Mr. Woody Tasch. So here's how we're going to lay this out. We're going to get Woody to come up and speak for a little bit. And then we also have a number of panelists who are kind of going to react a little bit to the thoughts of Mr. Tasch. And then we're going to open it up to a general dialogue, as we usually do. And then, as we usually do, we will continue the dialogue, sipping some of Jeremy's beer over at Governor's Pub after the event is over. So to get to our keynote address here, Woody Tasch, I first learned his name about 4 years ago, and it was a name that I learned from Richard Lorway, who's the current chair of the New Dawn Enterprises Board. And Richard was really intrigued by this idea of what was going on in the slow money movement in his very early days, and suggested that what Woody was doing and the slow money movement was doing really connected a lot with what we were trying to do here in Cape Breton. And so when I look through Woody's history, what I really see is there's sort of three things that are coming together there. One, his work on money and finance. Second, his interest in social purpose. And third, his interest in food and food production. So Woody is the founder and chairman of the Slow Money movement, the Slow Money Foundation. He pioneered the integration of asset management and philanthropic purpose in the late 90s as treasurer of the Jesse Smith Noyes Foundation, and is the founding chairman of the Community Development Venture Capital Alliance. For 10 years, through 2008, Tasch was the chairman of Investor Circle, a network of angel investors, family offices, and social purpose funds and foundations that has invested $150 million in over 230 early-stage sustainability-promoting ventures and venture funds. Woody is the author of Inquiries into the Nature of Slow Money, Investing as if Food, Farms, and Fertility Mattered. Now I'd like to invite Woody to come up and add his thread to the tapestry that we're creating here.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks to Doug and Nicole and Rankin for inviting me here. And everyone may have already forgotten that you introduced me earlier as an exotic thread. So I don't know if I'm an exotic thread or not, but I'll do my best. I got a little bit of a history today of the island from the folks at New Dawn, and obviously mining has been a big part of the history. And I was talking to, was it Richard? I was talking to Richard before, and we started talking about Bitcoins. How many people here have heard of, you've probably heard of Bitcoins, a lot of people have heard of them. How many people could actually explain really explain it so that we all agreed we actually knew what you were talking about? Like, what's a Bitcoin? Well, it's something on a computer, and it's some attempt to, let's say, design an alternative to broken fiat currency, broken bank currency, broken currency that's backed by governments in various ways that we might find unsettling or confusing. But actually, I'm going to get back to mining. Let me get back to mining right away. I left this in my room. I actually meant to bring it. I had a copy of Bloomberg magazine from, I think, the last issue, and the cover was on Bitcoin mining. Have you heard about Bitcoin mining? Check it out. I'm not making this up. There are venture capitalists backing companies that are mining Bitcoins. Now, what the hell does that mean? I'm not sure I know. I read the article. I still wasn't sure. but it has something to do with rooms of computers, ultra-fast computers that are trying to go into the little nooks and crannies of bitcoins to get fractions of them faster than everybody else. That part I didn't make up. So it just strikes me as a good counterpoint to a discussion of slow money, where we're just trying to make things simpler and go back to things that we understand, and kind of the exact opposite of that. So anyway, Bitcoin mining seemed pertinent to me when I was hearing about the mining that used to go on here. So what I'm going to do tonight is, I am breaking your rules, so I'm sure some of you will get antsy and want to throw something at me. So just do it. That's fine. I'll duck. I'm going to read just a short excerpt from my book, just to give you a flavor of the ideas that started this thing that's being called a movement. I'm still not sure what a movement, I kind of remember what a movement was from like when I used to be involved in them. I don't know if slow money is really a movement, but it is a bunch of people doing something a little differently together. And the book started it. I had no intention of starting a movement, I can assure you of that. But I did, Doug said a little bit about my history, but after 30 years of being in different roles in finance and philanthropy and angel investing in a very small scale venture capital, I took what I thought was going to be a year off in the mountains of northern New Mexico to write a book. And the purpose of the writing, didn't know for sure I was even going to write a book, it was just to write. And the purpose of the writing was to try to reflect on why, after all these years of attempting to do something better with money, I and we, those groups that I was working with, weren't having that much impact. Like, what were we really trying to do, and what is it we were really trying to address? And so all of those things, social investing and mission-related investing and program-related investing, now it's called impact investing, are all attempts to use the power of, let's say, investment capital to, quote, do the right thing, to try to fix systemic problems. And any of you who've tried to do that know how hard it is. Because as soon as you say you're investing, it pushes your mind and your analytical everything in a certain direction. And slow money really is a radical, in the best sense of that word, meaning a root, attempt to get outside that. And again, I would emphasize, I wasn't trying to convince other people to do it, I was just trying to explain what I was thinking and feeling, and it came out as this book. So I guess, let me just read you a little excerpt on this, you'll get the idea of some of the vision behind slow money. And basically, then I'm going to do a PowerPoint. I'll go through it a little quickly because I don't want to take too much time at the front end of the program, so just bear with me. It'll be kind of like brush strokes, and then we can get into the panel discussion, and there'll be plenty of time for Q&A and whatnot. All right. There is such a thing as money that is too fast. Money that is too fast is money that has become so detached from people, place, and the activities that it is financing that not even the experts understand it fully. Money that is too fast makes it impossible to say whether the world economy is going through a correction in the credit markets, triggered by the subprime mortgage crisis, or whether we are teetering on the edge of something much deeper and more challenging, tied to petrodollars, derivatives, hedge funds, futures, arbitrage, and a Byzantine hyper-securitized system of intermediation. Say that one several times fast. Okay, I'll say it one more time. A Byzantine hyper-securitized system of intermediation that no quant, no program trader, no speculator, no investment bank CEO can any longer fully understand or manage. Just as no one can say precisely where the meat in a hamburger comes from, it may contain meat from as many as, this is a quiz, audience participation. How many animals' meat can be contained in one industrially processed hamburger? Meat from how many different animals? Anybody know? Thousands is probably more than it is. Somewhere between hundreds and maybe up to 1,000 animals, meaning no one knows where the actual meat in your hamburger came from, which animal it came from. So just as no one can say where the money in this, no one can say where the meat in a hamburger comes from. No one can say where the money in this or that security has come from, where it is going, what is behind it, whether if it were to be stopped and like a hot potato held by someone for more than a few instants, it represents any intrinsic or real value. Money that is too fast creates an environment in which, when questioned by the press about the outcome of the credit crisis, former Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin could only respond, "No one knows." That's a powerful quote from the architect of the system. No one knows. This kind of befuddlement is what arises when relationships between capital, community, and bioregion are broken. And now I'm going to end with just a paragraph from David Orr, and I hope some of you in the audience have heard David Orr's name. He teaches at Oberlin College and is a very widely respected thinker, writer, teacher on ecological design and matters of sustainability. And I've often, unfortunately, quipped that his paragraph is the best paragraph in my book, which I resent. All right. Here it is, David Orr. And I also say he's a friend and he's on the advisory board of Slow Money, so I kid him with great respect, or I give him great respect and I don't really mean it. Okay. Just seeing if you're out there. Listen to this. There's a lot in this paragraph. There is an appropriate velocity for water set by geology, soils, vegetation, and ecological relationships in a given landscape. There is an appropriate velocity for money that corresponds to long-term needs of communities rooted in particular places and to the necessity of preserving ecological capital. There is an appropriate velocity for information set by the assimilative capacity of the mind and the collective learning rate of communities and entire societies. Having exceeded the speed limits, we are vulnerable to ecological degradation, economic arrangements that are unjust and unsustainable, and in the face of great and complex problems, to befuddlement that comes with information overload. I mean, that's the whole topic right there. So if you just think about money, information, and water, things you would never put together in any way, and think about what appropriate velocity might mean for those things either individually or together, it kind of points you in the right direction. So, that's just a little taste of the book. As I said when I wrote it, I had no intention of starting anything, and for the first year after the book came out, I really had no idea what we were going to do. And I'm happy to say, it wasn't my job to figure out what we were going to do. A whole bunch of different people started doing it, and together we started figuring out what to do. So that's the movement part. So what I'm going to do is, with AJ's help, because we don't have a clicker, I'm going to run through the PowerPoint. The first part of the PowerPoint is, let's say, kind of about the ideas behind slow money, and the second part is what we're actually doing. I'll give you an example of the kinds of things we're investing in, what's happening around the United States. We've had a little tiny dot of activity in Calgary, and there's going to, I should mention, I know it's the other side of the continent, but there is going to be a slow money meeting organized in Vancouver by someone who is very excited to kind of start doing slow money investing in BC. And that meeting is June 5th and 6th. I don't think anybody's here is going to be hopping on those late flights through Edmonton to Vancouver, but you should know that it's happening. And okay, so let's get into the PowerPoint. So this is a pig. I actually, my opening remarks from our fourth national gathering in Boulder last year were published as a little ebook last month called Staring the Pig in the Face, and it's because of this pig. And I actually always use this pig in every single talk I do, and I probably always will, because to me, what I think when I look at that pig is that our first responsibility is to look unabashedly at the consequences that our money is having on life on the planet. How does the way we invest affect other living things? And this pig, I didn't take this picture. This picture actually comes from a beautiful little company called Nyman Ranch, which has been pioneering, I guess you'd say pioneering, but certainly from a commercial standpoint, leading the way in bringing the produce to market from small family farms that are raising hogs sustainably outdoors. So you might have, let's say, 150 hogs on 1,000 acres, let's say, I'm sorry, 1,000 hogs on 150 acres, as opposed to several thousand hogs in one barn on a fraction of an acre. So, staring the pig in the face. How does the way we invest affect other living things? Not just hogs, but all other living things. Here's a funny way of staring the pig in the face. This is I'll read you the caption, don't strain to see it. This is a New Yorker cartoon from 1970. Pretty amazing. I don't know what the hell was going on in markets in 1970 for someone to put this cartoon in there. It says, corporate leaders gather in a field outside Darien, Connecticut, where one of them claims to have seen the invisible hand of the marketplace. No further explanation needed, other than here we are 40 plus years later and we're still dealing with the same, it's like the emperor has no clothes. I actually had another thing in my bag. I had two props from a talk I gave about 10 days ago, and they were the two, there was the Bitcoin thing, and then I had the Sunday Times, New York Times from a couple of weeks ago, and there was an article there, no, I'm sorry, it's from The Economist magazine. And it was about how derivatives are back stronger than ever, and how all the regulators are kind of just not regulating that much. Why? Because we need them to keep this thing going again, to get everything going back in. It's all about their back. The text said slicing and dicing is back stronger than ever. This was in The Economist. So here we are 40 plus years after a little glimmer of some cartoonist's insight that no one's in charge and we might not be going in the right direction, and we're still struggling to kind of get out of our own way. So now I have two magazine covers, this one from Time and following from The Economist. These are from the summer of 2009. And that was, my book came out in December 2008 and January 2009. So for most of that first year, I just spent my time talking to groups, both on a book tour and in other community groups, again, without any intent to get something to happen. But the energy of the conversations was just so strong that it was obviously something was going to happen. I started paying attention, and what did I see in the press? First, Time magazine, which is not a radical environmentalist magazine. And what it says, no, I'm not saying to be snide, I'm just saying it isn't. I mean, I could have put Mother Jones up there or some other magazine, which would be less pertinent, I think. So a very mainstream periodical, and what you can't read in the label, it says, this hamburger may be hazardous to your health, why the American food system is bad for our bodies, our economy, and our environment, and what some visionaries are trying to do about it. Time magazine. And it's a cover story, so it was a big thing in there. It was a lot about hog confinement units and industrial livestock and antibiotics and all the things that are crazy about the system. I don't know, I don't really have a sense of the backgrounds of everybody here, but if we convene a meeting, if Slow Money convenes a meeting, I can know that 95% of the people in the room are foodies. They're people who care deeply about agriculture or are involved in agriculture, and they're kind of coming at the money question from the food question. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through a litany of things about sustainable agriculture and industrial agriculture, but just say if we had time, or we can talk about it in the questions, there are serious, grave, serious, systemic problems with industrial agriculture. And I don't say that as, again, let's say a Mother Jones person, or what I say to someone who I'd like to think tries to be reasonable and react and pay attention and not be an ideologue at all. But questions of water and soil erosion and toxics in the food chain and endocrine disruptors and carbon in the atmosphere, nutrition, obesity, all these things. I mean, it's hard to think of a systemic issue that's not touched by the way we produce food. And we created a system of food since World War II that was, and that's important to remember, basically our system of food production is largely just started around World War II. It was a little bit earlier, but chemical fertilizers, and all the mechanization and consolidation has really only been around for 2 or 3 generations, but we kind of have this idea that, my God, it must have always been this way, and it wasn't. And that system was designed to produce cheap food. Then you can add cheap calories, cheap protein, cheap shelf-stable food. And it is amazingly effective at doing that. That's a really important thing to say. It works. It's not that it doesn't work, it works too well at doing that. In the course of doing that, there are all these long-term things that no one ever dreamt of. Just like no one ever thought there could be climate change. And now it's like, oh my God, there probably is. I don't know how everybody in this room feels, but I believe the odds are it's real, and the odds are we're causing it, and I'd like to do something about it if possible. So anyhow, we can talk later about the food system if people have questions, but let's just stipulate that if Time magazine is putting it on the cover, there's a lot of problems there. Next slide, The Economist. So that says modern economic theory, where it went wrong and how the crisis is changing it. Now the problem is the crisis didn't really change it. Where it went wrong part is there, and this cover story was there because a very eminent global financier named Jeremy Grantham. Anybody here know about Jeremy Grantham? Just curious. All right, so he has a firm called Grantham Mayo Van Otterloo. It has over $100 billion under management, and he's kind of like let's say, in the next rung down in the pantheon of global finance below George Soros. There's a bunch of guys, who aren't quite household names like he is, but to institutional investors, very eminent. And that's why this article was there. He wrote in his newsletter that the efficient market hypothesis is no longer valid. And again, we don't, just like we couldn't go into all the food stuff, we're not going to go into all the finance stuff. But if you think for a second that one of the globe's leading financiers said that one of the tenets of modern finance was no longer valid, no longer described market behavior, no longer described investor behavior, it's like, as we like to say in the States, Houston, we have a problem. Something's wrong. So you have the food system is broken and the finance system is broken. When I say broken, that's kind of a strong word. Let's say there were serious structural problems that are threatening, let's say, I don't use the word sustainability. I'll discuss the word sustainability in a second. All right, let's keep going. So when I stare the pig in the face, what I see as are a couple of really fundamental, let's say radical, fundamental issues. One is, the most fundamental is the speed of capital, and I'd say the most fundamental metric of the destruction it's causing to me is soil erosion. And again, we don't have time, but I'm just saying these things quickly, so if you just connect in your mind speed of capital and soil erosion, think, really? How could they be connected? Well, we chat about it later. But all this chart is meant to suggest is that we have lived through, in the last couple of generations, a once in the history of the planet period of acceleration. Never happened before, never going to happen again, not like this. I'm sure you're all familiar with Al Gore's different things he said at different times. But he would talk about how during his lifetime, all these things, well, yeah, it's an interesting thing. If you were born in 1945, that's not quite me. I was born in 51. But if you were born in 45, from that period to today, population was 2 billion in 1945. Global population was 2 billion, and now it's over 7 billion. So in one person's lifetime, population has gone up 3.5 times. It's never going to happen again in the history of the planet, that geometric growth. So these different things that have happened during this period of exponential growth, population, CO2 in the atmosphere, I have computer processing speed there. That's meant to be a little provocative. We can talk about that. I have New York Stock Exchange trading volume, kind of a funny little random indicator. So in 1960, anybody want to guess what the trading volume was on the New York Stock Exchange, the average daily trading volume? How did you do that? You read it today? You were studying for you heard me say that? You heard me say that on a video? No, that's not fair. We have to proceed right to governors. All right, how many beers on the average trading day no. All right, that happens to be the correct answer. I don't know how she did it. Okay, so 3 million shares in 1960. And what's the average trading volume now on the New York Stock Exchange? They've consolidated a little. There's a bunch of exchanges in there, so it's not a totally fair comparison. But what's the average trading volume today? That is also the correct answer. I'm going to have to be better prepared the next time I come. So, what does that say? Not that much. It says a little something, meaning during a period when global population went up 3.5 times, trading volume went up several thousand times. And it's just broadly suggestive of the fact that our money is just losing its connection to actual things on the ground. It's taking on a life of its own. Let's just keep going again in the interest of time. So this is also just meant to be broadly suggestive. These are big topics. We could talk about them all in great detail. If we were going to try to begin rebuilding and healing and repairing and reimagining what things would be like after a period of exponential growth where everything just looked like it was going up, 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 and there was no, rocket ships leaving gravitational pull of the Earth, what would it look like to bring things back down to Earth? To me, it would look like a period of reintegration. And this says investment and philanthropy with food in the middle. There's a lot of other ways it could have been said. But I would say the financial markets that have evolved since the East India Company, since 1600 in Amsterdam, when the earliest limited stock corporations were formed to protect capital for exploration of the new world that we're standing in, a system has left Earth. And derivatives are a really good example of it. People came to this continent, started taking things, cutting it up, selling it off to strangers, and now we have things that aren't even pieces of paper anymore. They're just dots on computers, and no one knows what's in them, slicing and dicing, et cetera. So that's the logical conclusion, I guess you'd say, of a system that is just built on exponential everything with no end in sight. And philanthropy is an attempt to kind of fix things, right? With a little of the surplus wealth that's created from all that exponential growth, we take some of the surplus off and then we try to, in let's say, non-market ways or meta-market ways, whatever word you want to use it to kind of fix some of the things, some of the many things that the market is not capable of doing, left to its own devices. So this reintegration, I think, is the big task of the 21st century. It's like what comes after all that exponential growth, a period of rediscovery, reintegration, rebuilding. And again, we don't have time to go into all of these things, but I have restorative economics down at the bottom. And I was talking to Richard earlier also. I learned everything I know from Richard. Where are you, Richard? There he is. We were talking a little bit about restorative economics. That's a term from Paul Hawken's book, The Ecology of Commerce, which is a seminal work that everybody should read. He wrote it in the 1990s. And I don't know why the term never took, meaning I don't hear it that often. You hear sustainable, 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 and think about what sustainable means. Sustainable means keep doing something for a really long period of time. But we can't keep doing what we're already doing. We have to change what we're doing. I would suggest in radical ways. Now, I don't know all the ways we have to change, but I do believe we can't keep trying to sustain what we've created. The system of everyone buying new cars and new washing machines and cigarettes and investing in atomic bombs and all the things we're doing that are all called GDP growth. And if we stop doing them, everyone freaks out because there are less jobs. And here you've got the problem, you've got the tar sands conundrum. There are a million of them. We all have the same problems. We've created these economic instruments that are very powerful and really hard to pull back from. We're like addicted to, you can say we're addicted to oil, we're addicted to atomic energy, all these things. So restorative economics is a very powerful, simple concept to say we can't just think about sustaining. We actually have to think about rebuilding, repairing, healing. And that's a little bit scary when you think about it. On the other hand, if you think about restoring an old house, we were talking about this before, it's a very simple concept. You can take something that is in disrepair and you can repair it and give it greater value. And I think we have to start thinking about that with our economy. We have to move from an economy based on extraction and consumption to an economy based on preservation and restoration. That's a big historic shift. That's, again, we got 400 years plus, more than 400, but 400 years, and then the last 50 to 100 years of exponential acceleration in the direction of extraction and consumption. And so it's a little scary to think about how we would move in this other direction, but I think that's what we were talking about, the beginning of that pendulum slowing down, and a bunch of us are jumping on there trying to kind of get it to slow down a little more and start coming back in the other direction. Keep going. So, slow money principles. This is, my staring the pig in the face. Don't try to read it. They're online if you want to see them. 34,000 people have signed them. We don't have a marketing budget. It's just kind of there. Every month some people come on and sign it. First one says we must bring money back down to earth. And I would say for a second, if everyone, I'll just spend like 15 seconds, everyone just think about what that might mean to them. We must bring money back down to earth. Whatever you were thinking, and let's assume that 25% of the people said something that was similar to themselves. Let's make the number up. And the other 75% had completely disparate things. Whatever you were thinking, I say if we do more of that, we'll be better off as a culture. Just start thinking about what it means to us to bring money back down to earth and start doing it. And let's keep going. Again, I would encourage you to go online and look at them if you're interested in this. This is like a one-sentence summary of my book. As it circulates the globe with ever-accelerating speed, money sucks oxygen out of the air, fertility out of the soil, and culture out of local community. Now, any academic person who's in the room, and there probably are some, might say, what a gross, ridiculous oversimplification, and it is. It's a total oversimplification. But I've come to believe in speaking about slow money for the last 5 years, mostly in the US, that there's enough truth in this simplification to mean something. And interestingly, some very sophisticated financial people have said absolutely, positively, yes, which I never expected. It isn't just, activist types. Next slide. All right, so I was saying I don't know what a movement is. And I was being pretty straight with you. I really still am trying to figure out what that means. But I would suggest to you, and what's hard for you to read on this slide, it really wasn't made for projection. It was made as part of a PowerPoint business plan. The first quote is Business Week. The second one is entrepreneur.com. The third one is Rodale. And the fourth one is Free Range Studios, who produce The Story of Stuff. And what it's meant to suggest is that this conversation that Slow Money has the privilege of sparking in various venues is being felt in widely disparate constituencies, everybody from finance to organics, general kind of activism, sustainability activism, whatever you want to call it. And that's been pretty heartening to me. It doesn't mean we have all the answers by any stretch of the imagination, but it just means we're tapping into something, and that our job is to try to give it life, to try to get it to translate into action. Okay, this is our second national gathering, Shelburne Farms, Vermont. Some of you might have been there, not too far from the Canadian border, near Montreal. We had 600 people in that tent, which was 200 more than we were expecting. It was really exciting for us. And I'll just read the quote. It kind of speaks for itself. There was a moment when I looked around the tent at Shelburne Farms to see the wonderful old codgers who have been farming in Vermont for generations, sitting with young environmentalists and food entrepreneurs and New York investment types, all nodding in agreement. Wow, talk about being the change we seek. It was a profoundly hopeful moment. That happens to be written by the president of the Santa Fe Community Foundation, who is there, who used to run the Vermont Community Foundation. So we're bringing together philanthropists, investors, food entrepreneurs, farmers, and we have a big category, which we refer to in-house as just plain regular folks who want to know where their money goes and where their food comes from. And we're all getting together, not always in meetings that large, sometimes in meetings like this, sometimes smaller, to start working together to bring our money back down to earth. What do we mean by that? Investing in small food enterprises near where we live. That's what we mean by one tangible manifestation of that. Instead of having all of our money circulating in all these instruments of various kinds, even socially responsible instruments of various kinds, we want to have the ultimate reward of taking a little of that money and doing something we really understand with it, meaning putting it into something we know, believe, is creating health in our communities and kind of leading us in the right direction, even though we don't know how much money we're going to make. So I hope that question comes up when we're having the panel discussion. So these are all the slow money groups in the United States. We don't have time to talk about it. I'll just say there are 18 chapters, 8 investment clubs, 34,000 signatories, 3,300 supporters. And what it's added up to is over $33 million invested in 262 small food enterprises around the United States. Most of this activity is in the last 3.5 years, because the first 18 months, as I said, we were just talking and there was no action yet. It took a while to kind of, for that first sprout to happen. Next slide. Now, so here are some examples. Now we're down out of all the ideas and stuff. These are the deals. This is to give you an idea of the range of things that people are investing in under this banner of slow money. So this I think the first two might be from Maine. So Slow Money Maine, Northern Girl, vegetable processing for culls and surplus crops. The investment was $125,000. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read all the little print. It's just people saying how excited they were to do this from both the entrepreneur and the investor side. Keep going. Maine Grains, an organic grain mill. $150,000 in loans and help securing $350,000 in grants. Slow Money North Carolina, really fascinating thing. A woman named Carol Pepe Hewitt, who is basically doing Slow Money full-time now as a volunteer, has facilitated over $1 million of loans in North Carolina from 70 investors into something like 40 different small food enterprises. A lone volunteer with no finance training. So I would encourage you to go on the website of Slow Money North Carolina if you want to see a beautiful example. All the deals are on there, stories. She's actually written a book about her experiences and whatnot. And this is here only to say, and again, in the interest of time, I'm not even going to read all these words. I'll just say a lot of the deals are very small. The thing about Slow Money that is somewhere between intriguing and maddening is that it goes everywhere from a single person writing a $3 million check into one deal, down to 3 or 4 people pooling together $1,500 to make a tiny loan for someone for a little piece of equipment in an organic bakery, let's say. So it's everything from kind of micro lending all the way up to angel investing. Let's keep going. Capay Valley Farm, Northern California, an $82,000 investment for a direct local food delivery service. Organic Valley, this is here, the next 2 slides. And by the way, go on our website if you want to see more information on what kinds of deals. A lot of it is there, and we're happy to share with you the rest of the information. The next two slides, no, stay on the Organic Valley slide for a second. That's here for, we haven't invested in Organic Valley. Slow Money didn't. It was already, I think many of you know, I don't know if Organic Valley distributes here or much in Canada even. It does. So Organic Valley is here. This is here because this is a co-op, a producer-owned co-op. They're up to something like 1,700 or 1,800 producer owners. Again, I don't know if any of the producer owners in Canada, let's assume some are. And they've created this beautiful organic brand. And the company's up to $700 or $800 million now. And interesting, last time I looked, I knew those numbers specifically. The earnings were 2%, of which 1% goes back to the co-op members. So from a traditional finance perspective, it's a very low margin, like why bother, from a finance standpoint. And it's also here to remind us that lots of relatively small things can add up to something very important and meaningful. And this takes on extra meaning now because this is Jack Laser from northern Vermont. He's just south of the border, he's north of Hardwick, Vermont. I forget the name of the town. He has a yogurt called Butterworks Farm Yogurt. He happens to be a personal hero of mine. He also happens to be very sick right now, which is why it takes on extra meaning. But he and his family have been on the same parcel. They're old hippies. They've been on this parcel since whenever it was, 1965, let's say. They've got several hundred acres, 60 cows. That's him growing feed for his cows on his land. And it's the most sustainable enterprise of its kind that I've ever seen. Very little inputs coming in from outside the farm. And they make $1 million a year of Butterworks Farm Yogurt because that's all they can make on their land. And we could have a discussion of is that a lot or a little. From a finance standpoint, it's a lifestyle. They call it a lifestyle business. From a local community food and farmer perspective, it's incredible. Wouldn't it be nice if we had one of these in every county in North America? I mean, that's kind of part of the spirit of Slow Money. It's like, you can't, there's no professional investment way to provide capital to this. The only way it's going to happen is at the community level, lots of us helping one another do it. So, hi, Jack. I'm almost done, and thanks for your patience. This is important for you to hear. During the day today, we were talking, and the New Dawn folks were saying, well, so what are the structures? And the answer is we don't have much structure. That's the movement part of this. People are finding ways to work together to put money into these deals, mostly as low interest, non-collateralized loans, so you need to hear that, mostly as very low interest, non-collateralized loans, vast majority. But there have been a few equity investments and there have been a few grants. People have kind of opted in when they've seen things they wanted to do. So let's make believe this was a different kind of meeting. And instead of us having a panel up here, we had 5 or 6 local food entrepreneurs here, and you were all here to consider investing in them. And you heard all this, and this is kind of what happens in a bunch of slow money communities. So you would hear the things, and one of them might strike you, I kind of like that guy, I think he's going to make it, I want to invest in him. So a few of you would get together and just make a loan directly to this person. There's no real structure. Slow money takes no fees, there's no intermediation. It's about people doing it with themselves, for themselves, in their community. That said, in Maine, where $8 million of the $33 million of slow money has been invested, by the way, and that's the closest chapter to you, so you can take that as a little kick in the pants. I don't know what it is about Maine. I have some ideas, but that's our most active group is Maine. 20 of them got together out of meetings like this and said, we want to do something a little more structured. So they each put $5,000 into an account, and they vote by majority where the money goes. They're making small loans out of a $100,000 pool, very small. So I just wanted you to hear that. There's now 8 of those around the U.S. I belong to one in Boulder. We're almost done. I think we got almost the last slide here. Next one. Okay. So I just covered a lot. I know it was too much. But I hope it'll be provocative and lead us to a good discussion. And this is a quiz. Is everybody ready? Susan B. Anthony, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, and Abraham Lincoln. What did they all have in common? You have to try to answer this. And don't say 3 million and 5 billion. I'll get really pissed. What did they all have in common?
Faces on money.
I don't think that's true, but it does come up a lot, because I don't think Genghis Khan had his face on money. But I don't, he might have. He might have. Come on, another guess or two. Okay, I'll give you the funniest answer I've ever heard. They were all Capricorns. and we actually decided to research that, and I think it's not true. But let's just say that was the best answer, actually. All right, they all ate only organic food. All right, so this is kind of a trick slide. It's just meant to remind us that it's only in the last 100 years, the last 75 years, whatever, that this food system has emerged. And when people say you can't feed the world like this, it's an elitist thing, all these different things, we don't have time to get into all those issues. They are wrong. We can do it. We can. There's plenty of land. There's plenty of soil still, even though we're losing 0.5% or 1% a year to erosion. There's still plenty. If we could somehow, this is the magic part, radically change the way we're doing it. But it's not because there isn't enough land and there isn't enough water. What percentage of grain grown in North America goes to cattle and cars, or to livestock and cars? Anybody want to guess? Leave out the fact that it's mostly GMO. That's a whole other issue. What percentage of the corn and soybeans grown in the United States goes to livestock or cars? About 75%, some number like that. So if someone says we don't have enough resources to feed the world growing organically, they don't know what they're talking about. That said, it would take a sea change in labor and settlement policies and all the rest. And it's kind of hard. We can freeze when we think like that. So this is just another way of staring the pig in the face. It was different for the whole history of the planet up until very recently, and it will be different again if we're going to have a restorative economy. And I've carried on way too long, so I think the panel needs to come up now.
Thank you very much, Woody. That was wonderful. So Woody's message about bringing money down to earth. I'm going to call up our panelists now, and each in their own way are trying to bring some of the local money down into the earth here. So the three of you, why don't you come on up, and I'll introduce you once you sit down here. So starting to Woody's left, we have Alicia Lake. So Alicia grew up on a subsistence farm in Cape Breton, and during her lifetime she has witnessed the decline of rural communities as farms and people disappeared from the island. She knows that farms and local food are both sustainable and vital to our rural way of life, and this drives her passionate fight to encourage local food production in Cape Breton. And to advance those goals, she has organized a successful farmers market in her hometown of Bedek. She sits on several boards of organizations that work to advance the profile of local food. And most famously, locally famous, she runs every September a challenge to eat 100% local. And she's been doing this for 3 years now. And this past year, she invited people to join her on the Eat Local quest. And our family, we signed up for the 50% local. And it's really taken off to get people to think about where their food comes from locally. I'm going to jump to my immediate right, as soon as I find your piece there, to Jeremy White. So it's nice when you get to be the host. You get to learn new things about people you thought you knew something about. So Jeremy's got an interesting background here. So Jeremy and his wife, Melanie, and their son, Everett, have spent the last 3 years establishing Big Spruce Brewing in Breton Fields certified organic farm. So they're making beer, which makes him a big hero of mine. So during his first 2 years in Cape Breton, he was self-employed as an executive recruiter to the capital market sector in New York and London. So he's got his roots in the finance world as well. Prior to working in executive recruiting, Jeremy worked with Bywater International Limited of the UK, living abroad in Costa Rica, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Miami, and Nicaragua. And from February 2006 to August 2010, Jeremy was project director of the $40 million design-build sewage treatment plant project for Bywater in Managua, Nicaragua. And that's where he oversaw the design, construction, commissioning, and financial performance of this major international infrastructure project. And the project won a Global Water Award for environmental stewardship in 2010, and to date is still the largest sewage treatment facility in Central America and one of the largest in Latin America. Jeremy holds a BA from the University of Western Ontario, and he wrote this himself. a PhD in Excel spreadsheets from Reality of Life University. I share his enthusiasm for Excel. Enough time, you can solve all the world's problems in Excel. And finally, I'll move to Jeremy's right, the gentleman who most of you know, Rankin McSween. Rankin McSween is the president of New Dawn, and New Dawn is the oldest community development corporation in Canada and is a founding member of the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. New Dawn believes that access to capital is central to the reinvention and revitalization of Cape Breton. And as such, under the leadership of Rankin, the organization has run 8 successful CEDIF, or Community Economic Development Investment Fund, campaigns, and have generated over $8.2 million in local investment. And more importantly, for those who know Rankin, he's a great storyteller. And every single story starts with the farm in Boysdale, where Rankin still lives. So I'm going to open up to the panelists to take a moment or two, and give you about 5 minutes or so, to react to the ideas presented by Woody. So maybe we'll go in the order of introduction here. So Alicia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. Wow, so that was a lot of information, but I think we can bring that back down to earth and kind of have a discussion, hopefully. So I guess when I'm thinking about the principles of slow money and how that relates to us here in Cape Breton, for me, it's probably really relevant to kind of the grassroots movement of the local food movement that's going on. So for example, farmers markets, CSAs, farm gate sales, that type of thing. And that's really increasing over the years. So for an example, in the last 10 years, we've gone from having 1 farmers market in Cape Breton to now having 9. So there's definitely an increased interest there. And of course, each one of those organizations are really creating wealth and employment in our communities, but they're also really providing a place for producers and consumers to really come together and build relationships. So I think that's one of their strongest assets to us. So really, I think at that level, I think that we can see slow money really happening here in Cape Breton. And for me, when people are kind of making those choices, right, deciding to buy local, that's really how people are kind of voting with their money, right? This is how we're saying this is the type of world we want to live in, or this is what we want our money to support. And for me, buying local is kind of a way of investing in our communities and in the future of our communities that's really accessible to everyone, right? If you need food, this is a way that you can buy in. It doesn't matter if you have tons of money to invest in someone else's business. This is a way that we can all invest in our own communities and in the future of our communities. But of course, there's challenges. And I can see, how the principles of slow money could really help kind of overcome some of those. And some of our challenges, I think, are kind of our greatest potentials as well, right? So what I see as kind of being the greatest potential here is to really start to move the local food movement away from that kind of fringe element over here into the mainstream food economy. So of course, Woody kind of talked about all these things about local food. We get into so many different issues when we start talking, right, about environmental issues, health issues, social issues, but really, I think we're all pretty aware of what the local food movement means, right? And I think that we need to stop kind of setting that apart, saying that that's abnormal somehow, right? That's different, right? And really recognizing that that is the normal, healthy way of things, right? The local food movement and all that means should be our normal system. And I think it really needs to be embedded in our day-to-day lives in every way. And not just something that's kind of on the periphery. But in order for that to happen, we certainly need to invest and we need to spend time. And I think that, as far as investing goes, there are things that are already happening that are kind of scaling up this, to this next level, right, to being part of the mainstream. So for an example, New Dawn's been using the CEDIF program to fund businesses in this community, and now we have the FarmWorks Investment Cooperative that is, using that same tool and funding farm-related businesses in our community. So I think that's a huge step. And we also see, restaurants and other institutions that are starting to incorporate more local food into their strategies. But really, I think that until local food is really integrated back into our mainstream food supply, and when I say that, I mean grocery stores, I mean hospitals, restaurants, every way that we get food. Until our local food is brought back there, I really think that farmers and farming are just going to remain, at the margins, as well as, everything that goes with that. So that's my last point. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Right. Well, it certainly is nice to get out of my brewer's apron and leaky rubber boots for an evening. I think one of Woody's slides is sort of touched on something that I really want to focus on in commenting on the power of slow money and slow local food. We are, for those of you who don't know Big Spruce Brewing, the only microbrewery in Cape Breton. We are, I regret to inform everybody, only the second certified organic on-farm microbrewery in all of Canada. We started as a small 2-fermentation house brewery capable of a couple of 800-liter batches of beer a week, and thought we'd splash into the market and perhaps work up to a full production schedule over the first 3 years. It was really great that 5 weeks in, we were at full production and already needing to expand our brewery, which we did, and we'll be doing again here before June. This all leads to the slide that was mentioning a few quotations about the power of local money, and one of them referred specifically to the power of the brand of slow money. A lot of people say, Jeremy, you got so much of the stuff right when you started this business. Actually, I got about 90% of it wrong, but for really good reasons. And one of them was I went into this saying I want to be organic because that's what we're organic farmers. That's what means the most to us. We want to be organic for that. We want to grow our own hops on our farm because we want proximity to our ingredients. We want to install a collection system for our process water so that we can use it for irrigation on our farm, because that just makes sense. What we didn't realize was the power that had behind our tap handle on every tap account that we go on to across Nova Scotia. Because now we're not just a brand. We're a brand with a really, really unique story. And that was totally unintended. People order Big Spruce because, yeah, it's organic, but did you know they grow their own hops? And every August they have people over to the hop yard to help pick hops, and they brew a batch of beer with fresh organic green hops. People participate in this. They come into our door. We aren't a brewery behind some even glass windows. We're a brewery with a sales counter right in the middle of the brewing floor. So when you come in, you might trip over a hose. This is about connecting people with our process. And we didn't realize we were doing that and creating this story behind our brand, but boy, has it ever been unbelievably powerful to see the sort of brand loyalty start to take shape once people hear and talk about our story. It's probably the easiest thing about this whole concept is the fact that it's quite self-perpetuating, because it's very addictive and very easy to start talking about and getting really excited about. And we see that in our brand, and really see enormous potential here in Cape Breton, where there's wonderful microclimates, a fierce sense of pride about being from here, and sharing and living and experiencing the culture from here. These are all things that translate very nicely to this movement, and I think it can be a real center for it, not only in the Maritimes, but maybe really Canada-wide as well. So, we've been part of that. Like I say, some of it somewhat unintended, but I really hope that more of it starts to happen, because I see great potential for that here in Cape Breton.
Can I just lift this up without getting in trouble? It should be okay. Well, thank you very much. Great night. I do want to, there's a story about a farm I'd like to tell, but it's not about my farm. I was reading, when I was reading Woody's book, there's a great story in there. And I wondered if he was going to use it, and I promised myself if he didn't, I would. So it's a story about there's a priest, and there's a rabbi, and there's a hedge fund manager, and they're driving in the country. And some of you have come across this, I know, but it's worth the telling.
Don't butcher this story.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Anyway, they're driving and they're kind of lost, so they see this light at a farmhouse, and up they go, and they knock on the door, and the farmer answers the door, and they say, look, we're really tired, and we're lost, and we'd like to stay here tonight. If you'd put us up, farmer says, no problem. But I got one bed, one room, so two of you can share the bed, one of you's got to sleep in the barn. Priest says, no problem, I'll sleep in the barn. Be glad to do it. So the other two go off to bed, priest goes to the barn. A few minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's the priest. So the priest says, look, I didn't realize there was a cow in the barn. For some reason...
It's a Hindu priest. That's it. I'm here to kibitz. I got
God bless you. The Hindu priest says, I didn't know there was a cow in the barn, and I just don't feel good about sleeping beside the cow. So the rabbi says, don't worry about it, I'll go. So off he goes, the other two go off to the room, rabbi goes to the barn. A few minutes later, it's a knock on the door. It's the rabbi. And he says, look, there's a pig in the barn. And you know our traditions, and I'm just not comfortable sleeping with the pig. It just makes me uncomfortable. So the hedge fund manager says, my God almighty, this is ridiculous. We got to get some sleep. I'll go to the barn. So off he goes to the barn. Everybody goes off to bed. A few minutes later, there's a knock on the door. They go down, they open the door, and there's the cow and the pig. So, in terms of this wonderful concept, slow money, as you know, many of you know, we've been in the business of doing this CEDAF. This is the 10th year we're going to be doing it. Part of the story behind it is that many of you have heard already. There's the estimate from the Department of Finance is there's $100 million in RRSP leaves Cape Breton every year. Goes off to, in a figurative sense, it goes off to Toronto, we say, and they invest it, and presumably they create wealth and jobs, and then in a figurative sense, our children go off to Toronto and work in those jobs. So it's all about, we got to begin to hold a piece of that money here. We've been doing that now for 10 years. As was mentioned, we raised a little bit over $8 million. What we're hoping, this next one we're going to do, we're hoping to get close to $10 million and that we'll have gathered together. I think that is, for me, a great story about slow money. As I was thinking about it today, I was thinking about, in many ways, this building, restoring this complex, for me, is a story about slow money. I love that notion of restoration. The other example I wanted to use, which is outside of New Dawn, and as I was thinking about this whole slow money thing, I was thinking of a man by the name of Dr. Stephen Manley, who some of you know. I think I saw Lynn Beckler come in, she's a good friend of his. So Steve is former professor at CBU, former dean of science, has really struggled with some health issues. But Steve is just adamant about restoring the Cape Breton forest to what it once was. And to be with him is just an incredible experience in terms of him describing what it would take to get to that restoration place. And he is incredibly generous with his trees and with his time and with his education. And he just gives me this wonderful appreciation. The other thing that he has said to me is that all of Cape Breton, the best use for the wood we have is we should be heating our homes with it. We shouldn't be importing oil. And he has all kinds of interesting descriptions in terms of why that would work and how it would work. And I've always found it quite inspiring. What I kind of ponder, the challenge I ponder is this, is that, my goodness, just let's pick the CEDAW program that New Dawn is involved in. So 100 million a year is leaving the island. So we've captured a little bit of that. We started this program, we started trying to raise money using the CEDAW in 2004. This year, please God, we're going to raise a total of 10 million over 10 years. In that time, most of 100 million is left. That's $1 billion in 10 years is left. So $1 billion out, we've grabbed 10. The whole process of scaling up, my goodness, it's a big challenge. And on the one hand, I find it incredibly exciting, the possibilities, and to hear the stories that Woody talks about what's going on across the United States, and to hear the stories from the other two panelists. But it is, my goodness, the road ahead is going to be full of challenges. How do we scale this up? Thank you very much.
Now, before I throw it to the floor, I'll get to you. I'll give Woody a chance to, if you want to react to any of those comments. Yeah.
I'd just say one very general thing that has to do with storytelling and narrative. Both those words were used at different times. And today at New Dawn, the word conversation came up several times from them. They describe part of what they're doing as hosting a conversation in different ways. And this will seem like a kind of an odd segue from Rankin's comment about scaling. Scaling is hard when you think about it mechanically because all the numbers are really daunting, and so it's daunting. But when you think about it as a conversation, when you think about it as a culture building activity about basically, let me tell it as a quick anecdote. Actually, it relates to Canada. So I had a very quick snippet on a Toronto business TV station at some point about 2 years ago, and I don't remember where I was. I was somewhere like in California or something, but no, I was in New Mexico. And they got me into a studio facing a camera. It was the weirdest experience. It was just a camera, like right there, and one technician, and I was just connected to a studio and a live thing on a business segment in Toronto. And I forget what had sparked it, but I'd gotten into the Toronto, Slow Money had gotten mentioned in a Toronto paper, so they picked the story up. And I listened to them for a while before I went on, so I heard it was a very conservative news thing. I knew they were going to be very skeptical. And the guy came on and he said, what kind of crazy thing are you, he basically kind of said, what are you, really? Slow Money? That's like totally preposterous. What are you doing? How are you going to convince anybody to do it? And I said, we're not trying to convince anybody to do anything. There are millions of people who want something like this to happen. I'm just trying to figure out how to help. And when you think about it as a conversation, that's basically allowing us, whoever the us is, and it doesn't have to be everyone, to opt into something, to say, you know what, we want to try to do this. And then you can say it might scale, it might work, it might, who knows what the rest of it is, but the conversation, the narrative, the changing the way people talk about things is really important and is immediately rewarding, I would say, And it doesn't always translate into effective or perfect action by any means. You might trip over a hose. But that's the beauty of it. I think we all want a chance to go in there and see if we're going to trip over the hose or not. So anyway, I don't know what kind of rebuttal that was to everything, but that's the best I got.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to throw it to the audience now. If you have comments, questions for any of the panelists, the whole panel, or just want to speak a few, whatever's on your mind. Is this mic live over here? I didn't see the one over here. So we have two mics. I can't see the one over here, but we have two mics if you want to come to a mic and say a few words. Oh, we only have one. Okay. My eyes are not deceiving me.
My name is Brian Joseph. I'm a former board member of New Dawn way back in the early days, and also retired from Cape Breton University. Currently, I serve as Commissioner of the Law Reform Commission of Nova Scotia. It's wonderful to be back in this building again. And a special thank you to Woody for coming and the other panelists. My question is this. Recently, I heard of some regions in New England who have adopted a local currency. I'd be interested in Woody's comments on how he thinks that might aid the implementation of the principles of the slow money movement, and in particular, if it might be useful as a means of scaling up with reference to Rankin's question. Thank you.
I don't know, I'll go first, or I don't know if you want to follow on. I'm trying to make a brief comment about a very big topic. Local currency is primarily a tool for connecting local consumers to local businesses. So it's very important in that regard. It's just a beautiful way of concretizing that relationship. So a buy local campaign where a store agrees to take a local currency is a way for that store to say, I want to connect with you, consumers who recognize the importance of buying from me. Slow money is about another part of the equation. It's about investing, providing working capital, growth capital, risk capital to entrepreneurs. So the same vehicle doesn't apply directly, but they're very sympathetic, like other spokes of the same wheel. So that's one comment. The other comment is that to me, I'm taking off any kind of leadership hat I have. I'm just speaking as just one person. To me, it is very tempting to try to develop some new economic theory, a new currency. I mean, that's what Bitcoin is, a new system that will just completely change. Our currency stinks. We don't like this about it. It's issued by banks as debt, and it's backed by, and there's all kinds of things we don't like about it. So it's very tempting, or maybe I'll say better than tempting, important to try to design alternatives. But to me, right now, I think we just got to take the currency we have and do the right thing with it. And to me, that's the most important thing I can be involved in. It sounds like I'm criticizing alternative currency, and I'm not. But I'm just saying my juice, if you will, goes towards let's take that crappy currency we have and do the right thing with it, because we got to do stuff right now, and I don't know how to invent a whole new system. So.
Thank you.
Feel free to queue up as you come with your thoughts.
I didn't intend it, but I got my walk in for the day. This is more of a comment than anything else, and I was struck by a couple of things when Jeremy said they didn't realize that they're doing what they actually accomplished. That the project they had with all kinds of very clear ideas about what they were going to do turned out to be something really different. And I like that. And the related comment was when Woody said that he retreated somewhere to write a book. I think he intimated that he wasn't quite sure what he was going to write, but he wanted to write about his experience. in the money business, and he didn't know how it was going to turn out, but within, what you said, a year and a half or 2 years, something began to happen that was a big surprise to him. And I think some of that was probably in Alicia's comments. She didn't realize that she was going to get a number of disciples when she went on the September program. And that's the thing about doing something that's really different. You don't know. You don't see all the possible things that are going to come out of it. New Dawn has been really, really successful in educating people about why the young people are leaving. They're following the money. And they don't realize that this $100 million in mutual funds, they're not even getting a good return on them. The return on that money goes, first of all, to the companies, and then you get something from what's left over. So there's an education going on there that's really, really important about how money works. I was at a wake one time and I met these two young fellows. They were former students at the university here, and their old grandfather, a carpenter, was there, and the mother was so proud of them, and she said in the presence of the boys, it's so good that you're here. And I said to them, yeah, it is great that you're here, but you're far away. He said, well, the young fellow says, that's where the money is. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. While you're thinking about who's going to queue up next there, Woody, you brought up this idea, you started with the Bitcoin idea, and then we just had a question on local exchanges, local currencies. So money is this concept that you're obviously, it's central to what you're doing, but yet you see problems with the way, the system we have right now. What is the value of money then? What is money for you? What is it?
Could we have some large open-ended questions, please?
These are the types of questions my students love.
No, I bring it on myself by putting all these ideas out. I have no idea. I'm not an economist. I'm just someone who's had a lot of practical experience in different kinds of finance and philanthropy and whatnot. It shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody who heard what I just said. I never studied economics because, for all kinds of reasons. But I guess I'm leaping ahead in time a little bit. I graduated from college in 1973, which happens to be the year that E.F. Schumacher published Small is Beautiful. So I hadn't read it when I was in college, but right after I did, and it just kind of affirmed to me everything that I was worried about contemporary finance, and that's a whole other discussion. So I would say, while I don't know what money is, I would say money has no value, actually, I guess if I was going to say that, except in terms of the relationships that it enables, and the challenge we have is moving from a hundreds of years, let's say, of momentum towards a system that only values money as a transaction device. It's a buy low, sell high. There's an arbitrary arithmetic computation that is what everyone focuses on, and the relationship behind the transaction means nothing. Is made invisible. In fact, the buyer doesn't know the seller. Maybe neither one even understands what they're buying and selling, if you want to go there into the whole derivatives thing. But even in things that are more tangible, the buyer is invisible from the seller. To me, it's no coincidence that the metaphor of the invisible hand took out so much power, because everyone's invisible from one another. So that's not an answer to what the value of money is, because I don't really know how to answer it. But I feel a lot of really deep problems with the way we've allowed money to define our relationships.
Can I add?
Please.
Thanks. So for me, part of this transition of starting to buy local all the time has meant that money has actually evolved in my life from being what Woody's talking about to being this tool almost that I can support people in my community, like people that I care a lot about, right? So so now when I have, built up these relationships with people, relationships with farmers, and, I pay for my food now with blank checks. So I just give people a blank check, and when they decide how much I've used or whatever, or how much the thing is, they cash it, right?
I have some beer for you.
And I will give you a check. But I think that, that we can kind of move beyond that, right? And start to see, who do we want to support, right? And it's all about those decisions that we make every single day, right? Exactly, what are we buying? And not just in food, right? But all those decisions, right? Which stores are we shopping at? When it's holidays or we need something, right? Do we need to buy something? Can we exchange with our neighbors? Which other ways can we do that so that we're not necessarily kind of slaves to this system where money is just taking off, right? And I think that for me now, I kind of have pride in, and I really enjoy the spending now, right? Because I know that I'm maybe contributing to my friend who's a farmer's child's education, or, Jeremy's livelihood, right? And keeping him.
But I don't get a check.
No, I typically pay you in cash. But it has changed, I can say that.
Just want to add a quick thing. That Time magazine cover that said the real cost of cheap food is a thing on what money is. So when you buy something that's cheap, all that means is you're not recognizing all the other costs. Right, and that's just what you talked about in a different way. If you start thinking about or recognizing the other costs, some of which can be quantified and some of which can't be. There's like that commercial, that MasterCard commercial says priceless. It's kind of a joke, but it's like a serious thing. The things that really matter, it's like water. What's the price of water? Go figure it out. There are people buying and selling water. But what's the actual price of water? And the answer is, of course, it's priceless because there's not enough of it and we didn't create it and the blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's all about the things that money doesn't easily take account of that we have to kind of recapture. And some of that can be done through a system like this, and some of it's just about a conversation and a culture shift and building relationships that, in place, to go back to Rankin's thing. Those relationships are priceless. They're like water. And if you follow his thinking, we've lost them. It's run away, and the aquifer is low. The social aquifer is, very low.
Thank you. So every story has its root, and the story of bringing Woody Tasch to Cape Breton begins with Richard Lorway. I'm not sure if you even remember that, Richard.
Yeah, I do actually. I called you from the car, and I was on my cell phone, and I probably broke the law, but hey. any police officers? Anyway, and that stemmed from something I think was an interview I heard on CBC, and I'm an avid CBC listener, and then that led me to the web, and then that prompted me to call Doug. Anyway, I guess my question is for the food producers on the panel and in the audience. There are a number of communities for which a daily fresh food produce market is really at the core of their community. And I think of St. John, New Brunswick, which has a big covered market in the center of town. It's a full block in the center of town. And of course, the market in Ottawa. And I'm really encouraged to hear that there's 9 farmers markets that have sprung up. But I guess my question is this: is there a way to better facilitate the relationship between the producers of food and the consumers? Can we think of a better way? Because right now, I'm assuming that most of these markets are weekend things versus a daily thing. And if you want to change people's habits, you have to make things convenient for them. And so, and I guess I'm speaking, I'm on the board of New Dawn, obviously, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but is there a way that we could help you, and do you have ideas how we could make this work more effectively and more efficiently?
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have, right, in Cape Breton, is trying to link up producer with consumer. As you said, most of the markets are on Saturdays, or they're in remote areas, and it kind of means people are really going out of their way to find local food, and that's just not practical, right? We can't expect people to do that. And this is kind of where we see a big rural-urban divide, right? So last September, a lot of people joined on to do 50% local, and people in rural areas had a really easy time. They told me they were maybe getting 75% or 80% of their food locally, and people in urban areas, like in Sydney, were really struggling, right? So there are groups right now that are trying to work on a pan-Cape Breton distribution hub idea, and coincidentally, I think we are actually meeting with New Dawn next week to talk about possible ways that we can work together. But that's certainly been identified as one of our key challenges here, is how do we make that linkage and how do we do that distribution? So, great question, thank you.
Jeremy, could you speak to your startup process, particularly in your challenges or lack of challenges in financing the startup?
Well, we were fortunate, I think, in that we had all of our funds we received from Cape Breton sources, one of which was the FarmWorks CDIF that Alicia and I believe a couple of other panelists here have already mentioned. And yeah, it's perhaps interesting that as we are all living in a what is sometimes somewhat unfortunately categorized as a rural economic, deprived rural economic community, there is a perhaps advantage to that, in that there is an availability of funding for the types of businesses that the stakeholders and lenders are looking to invest in, that will have trickle down, slow money effect on local economy. And I think we were pretty successful in being able to identify ourselves as in fact being able to do that. We've moved a little quicker than we thought we would toward things like higher employment numbers of the brewery and that sort of thing. But it's definitely out there. It's not as daunting and hard as certainly many people think it to be. Your first step is really just engaging in conversation with individuals like me who have maybe done it, and the scary, daunting potential lenders that are more than willing to speak to individuals about conceptual ideas and help them come through right to detailed business plans that help them get off the ground. So, I'm involved in many things, but one of the big things that's near and dear to my heart is also behind what we did the brewery as, which was an on-farm facility. We wanted proximity to ingredients. Now, we've been pretty successful at growing 10 or 15% of the hops we need for the brewery's needs. We have a relationship with another hop grower in New Brunswick, which is pretty far away, but about as close as I can do right now. It's quite a shame that so much of brewing ingredients has to come from the west coast of North America, and I'm talking about both grain and hops. Staggering statistics in craft beer, stuff like craft breweries make up less than 5% in North America, but we as a group buy 65% of the production of hops in North America. There is opportunity to feed businesses like mine in agriculture, both with grain, its malting, its processing, and especially in the growing of hops. And we've been a big part in trying to help a number of local growers get off the ground with hop growing initiatives in and around Cape Breton, because we think it bodes well for our business, and we know it can work as well here in this climate. So, lots of possibilities.
Thank you. The microphone.
Well, I don't have any suggestions. I was just making an observation. And that is, it seems that one of the essential ingredients for especially starting the whole process and then driving it along is courage. Because it's a big leap of faith, right? We were talking on the way over about the relationship with the whole idea of real cost accounting. And Paul Martin, who has become an advocate of real cost accounting, but of course, he didn't until he was finished being the finance minister. Because it's just too hard, right? And so people don't do it. So I guess my observation is that what needs to happen is a way for people to feel that it's less of a leap of faith, maybe, or something that would give them the courage to do it.
Okay. Anyone want to reflect on courage?
I just wanted to make the point when I'm speaking with children or typically teenagers, I always tell them, because people say, oh, local food is more expensive, and sometimes the kids will come at me with that. And I always say, you know what, when you see a price, a local price, don't question that, right? Like your neighbor who produced that product, like Jeremy, for an example, knows how much it costs to produce that item. He's not trying to rip you off. That's the actual cost. But when you're in a grocery store or somewhere else and you see an extremely low price, question that. Like ask yourself, what has caused that price to be low? Like what has been compromised? And I guarantee it's either the environment, someone's wage, your health, someone else's health. Like something has been compromised to make that low. And like Joyce said, if you started to take all those things into account, very soon you're going to see those prices completely change.
Just while we're on the topic of the cost of food, or prices and costs, what percentage, and these numbers are going to be orders of magnitude, I'm not going to stand by them to the decimal point, what's the average amount that the American household spends on food? What percentage of the household budget is spent on food? We have a 15%, we have another number? 5? 35? Oh, this is good. Come on, another number. 10. I think the answer is 9, but it's less than 10%. We have cheap food. Time magazine. What's the average percentage of a household budget in France that they spend on food?
18.
What did somebody say, 18?
18.
That's probably pretty close. That might be exactly right. I don't know. It's closer to 20%. So when you talk about price in the abstract, it's like we just need cheap things. We just want to have everything be cheap. It doesn't reflect all kinds of other things. You can have, as a culture, you can value something, you pay for it. I'll bet you if we went around this room and talked about how people value cars and trucks, some people paid a lot more for the same four wheels and the whatever than somebody else because they value that, whether it's a brand story, whether it's an actual thing, they may need it for a different thing, whatever it is. They placed a higher value on that transportation than maybe somebody else did. So we have, as a society, this is a very, again, gross oversimplification, more than enough money to pay what we need to be paying for food. And there's a whole other corollary issue. I know that I said that was a gross oversimplification, and I delivered. There's another way of talking about that, and that is the relationship between healthcare costs and food prices. And there are many, many studies and people, some of the slow food people, a whole bunch of other people who, if you do a chart, this is true, if you do a chart that correlates now these are, I think, American numbers I'm referring to, but let's call them North American numbers. What we were paying as a nation, or as part of a GDP, for food versus healthcare in 1950. And then you chart those two same things now and you see crossing. We drove the price of food way down and we drove the price of healthcare way up. Now that is not a direct linear causality thing, but it is broadly illustrative of what happens when you just go for the cheapest of certain kinds of things and you push all the other costs somewhere else in the society.
Charles?
I wanted to pick up on Richard Lorway's question about supporting having local food available and that sort of thing. We're making progress here in getting producers. And that's one thing that's lacking in our ability to supply the food that people need. We don't have very many people who plant gardens. When I grew up in Dominion, everybody had a garden. My father had a cow, and he had a pig, and he had hens, besides his work as a carpenter for the coal company.
Did you have a Hindu priest? No.
No, but we had a rabbi. About 20 years ago, the Federation of Agriculture had push on to have more consumption of, more spending of our money locally. And they come up with a program was called Think Cape Breton First. And I was part of that committee, and it was kind of interesting that as we moved along with the project, some of the merchants got in on it, and some of the car dealers get in on it. And so they were thinking about, well, you should buy your cars in Sydney rather than in Halifax, or you should buy your clothes, do your shopping in Sydney rather than in Halifax. But the Federation of Agriculture was thinking about food. So the whole thing became meaningless as far as the original creators of the program is concerned, although we still see signs around Think Cape Breton First. So there's been an effort to sort of corral that money. In Dominion, where I grew up, in the 40s and 50s, my father was the mayor of the town. He wanted the people to spend their money in the town rather than going to Glace Bay. And he was mad there was no real good bus service, but there were many taxi drivers who ferried people back and forth to the other town. Now that's, in a way, what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get people to spend their money here for food. I think there's an intermediate step involved here. I would say, let's say when you're going out to lunch, if you think about where you're going to have your lunch, okay? You can go to Burger King, you can go to Tim Hortons or whatever, but there are restaurants that are owned by local people. You can pay the wage of local people who have a bank account in the city. And that is creating local employment, getting money circulating within the town, instead of some of these chains, where the quality of the food is not as good as some of the restaurants we could think of here in Sydney. And we could be supporting these restaurants more. So a good restaurant doesn't have to fold because there's not enough money. There's lots of money being spent in these chains, but we should spend some of our money for the good cooking of local people.
Thank you, Charles. So, I'm going to take moderator's privilege here to get the last question in. So Charles just talked a little bit about the Think Cape Breton First campaign that some in the room probably remember. And we see that as a tool to achieve some of these goals, to achieve some of these principles. And one of the tools, I like this idea that Woody talked about, how he's not out there to convince any of something, he's helped them to do what they already want, and create the tools to do those things that we already want to do. And one of the tools that we have in Nova Scotia that has been mentioned a number of times over and over tonight is the CDIF program that provides incentive for investors to invest in local companies. So if I can point to Rankin and then maybe to Woody, if you talk a little bit about how you see the CDIF program, what is the value of the CDIF program, Rankin, for you and your experience in doing economic development over the last 30, 40 years? And Woody, I know you've heard a little bit about the CDIF program today. I'd love to hear your reactions in terms of where that might fit in on sort of a North American, your experience around North America looking at different tools that are available. Rankin?
Well, first of all, I mean, the whole business, for me, there's the primary relationship between capital and community, and in particular capital in this community. I mean, I think it's fundamental that any community that has recovered, any community that has found the means to take charge of itself has had to resolve the issue of how is it going to get its capital. And there is this incredible irony. In many ways, it's like a tragedy that we quite unconsciously, I think, as a community, send the money off island, and that doesn't work for us. It's all about understanding we got to begin to hold some of that here. We don't have to hold it all here, but we got to hold some of it here. I always think of when they closed the coal mines and the steel plant, and the province and the feds got together and they put up the $80 million in the community offset. There was $80 million over 4 years. We had the equivalent of a royal commission discussing that in terms of who should get it, who shouldn't get it, what it should be spent on, what it shouldn't be spent on. It went on and on and on. There was $80 million over 4 years. We thought that was a lot of money. Every year, we send $100 million off island, and we don't talk about it. We're just oblivious to it. One of the things that I was taken with in terms of reading Woody and listening to Woody that really fit for me in terms of the issue of capital. One of the pressures, one of the incredible responsibilities that New Dawn has assumed in participating in this program is we take your money. Like, we're very conscious we're taking your money. You're giving us that privilege. We're in relationship with you. We live in this community with you. We meet you on the street. We assume that responsibility, and that is an incredible both burden and privilege. I mean, it's the relationship. It's this relationship we have. And then when we place the money, we're quite aware of being in relationship with the entity into which it's being placed. And I was really inspired in terms of part of the problem, part of the jam we've gotten into in terms of finance in the world is the relationship is gone. And in our own little experience here, we have rediscovered that and rediscovered its value.
Thank you. Woody.
That really should be the last word. So I'll merely say, when I hear Rankin, Wall Street is so 20th century. This is the 21st century. You can say it's old-fashioned too, and that's all right. And so, even though slow money, the ideas behind slow money come from a very deep place of we need to disintermediate. We're talking about disintermediating Wall Street. We're not talking about disintermediating New Dawn. There needs to be a new generation of small, place-based, relationship-based intermediaries, because not every individual, okay, here, let's do this as a fun little audience participation. There's no wrong answers here. This is a serious question. How many people in this room think they would ever be in a position, ever, you can imagine enabling conditions, to be in a room with a food entrepreneur and consider writing a check of $5,000 or more to invest in that business? Think about it for a second. This is a serious question. Okay, I can't totally see, but about 20 hands went up in the room. That's pretty cool. That's more hands than I thought were going to go up, so that's great. And then there's another 70 people in the room, whatever the numbers are, who didn't raise their hand. By the way, I'm serious, to those people who raised their hand. Do we have a clipboard that we can write your names down? No, that's a lot. That's a lot of people, and I'll bet they didn't raise their hands lightly, and there's probably another 10 who might have raised their hands if they thought about it a little more. So that's quite a few people who are willing to even entertain the idea. And I picked the number 5,000 sort of out of the hat, but it's because the number that's in our investment club, so it seems to be a number that kind of comes up in some psychological gestalt to thinking, maybe I can do this. But there's a lot more people in the community who would like to see something like this happen, but they're not going to ever have the time, energy, gumption, whatever it is, to write a check of $5,000 or more. That doesn't mean they're bad people or anything else. It means it's hard to do it for any reason. So you need intermediaries who can create ways for it to be easier for you to do it. So we need both of these things. We need more civic engagement. We need more people who are willing to do it for themselves. And again, to me, that is the actual ultimate hope. If you say we'd like to have 1 million new small and mid-sized organic farmers in North America in the next generation, just making up a number, where's the capital going to come from to do that? It's going to take too many billions of dollars to even count for that to happen. And for it to happen, you're going to need two things: a new generation of place-based, relationship-based intermediaries, and a whole lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions of people actually doing it with and around those intermediaries. So anyway, I just want to celebrate what Rankin said and say Wall Street is so 20th century.
Well, folks, I'd like to thank our panelists for helping us with this discussion and dialogue. So thank you very much, Alicia, Jeremy, and Rankin. We're going to say goodbye to our live stream folk, I think in a couple of minutes, but the people who are here, you have to stay around, because Woody has told us, and he hasn't told us what this is, he's got this big secret, but he's got something to present to us. He says it's going to be fun, it'd be interesting, but it's secretive. He hasn't told anyone in the room yet. So stay around for that for just a couple of minutes, but thank you very much to our panelists.
Oh, you can. Well, you should go so you can see it. Yeah. All right. So, are we off? Are we off the live stream?
Well, before we jump in,
I didn't mean to offend the people who are on the live stream.
there's benefits of showing up live, and I'll leave it to you.
Okay.
Do you need me out of your way?
No. Well, everyone's going to be staring at the screen. So.